to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm Anna.
And I'm Kate. This week I spoke to Beau Bertoli, one of the co-founders of Prospa, a fintech focused on SME lending here in Australia. Really great chat, and one that really ties quite nicely into some of our recent research on what's happening in terms of SME recovery post-pandemic or as we come out of the pandemic. The intent of this episode really was to talk quite a lot about that and Beau's experience in terms of helping SMEs really get back to work and some of the key challenges that SMEs are facing. I think we've seen this in our data quite a lot as well. SMEs in Australia are really starting to feel a lot more confident about the future. They are expressing a need for lending and for more flexible lending. And Prospa really feel that gap here in Australia, though I think is probably a universal challenge that SMEs face. And Beau spoke quite a lot about the fact that there really was a key unmet need. And given what we're currently going through and the fact that as things start to reopen, we continue to have a really two-speed economy, that will become more important. And having Beau's experience, and I think Prospa's experience of launching new products, going into new markets, and also going through this economic change will be really useful, hopefully, for other markets and other founders out there thinking about how to solve this problem for customers.
I think this is something that's becoming particularly interesting and relevant because we talk a lot about what have been the impacts of the pandemic on consumers, but then there's a whole other picture when thinking about the impact on business owners. And we know that globally there's been a massive impact in the retail and hospitality space. And I think this is something where Prospa is quite uniquely positioned to actually help a lot of customers who are either having difficulty accessing credit or who really value credit in an environment where they're not getting the customers, or they would have the customers, but there's been limitations with movement or people even being able to visit that store or visit that restaurant. So I think this is particularly relevant. And I think when thinking globally as well about what businesses can do and what lenders can be thinking about, this is going to be really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, there's a lot that Beau talks about just in terms of that access to credit being so important for a business who businesses don't want to be doing banking. I think we could probably say the same for consumers, but businesses really just want to be running their business and to be earning money, and even things like focus on staffing and fixing some of those needs that they have internally. So yeah, a really good example. Beau's experience of running different businesses and launching Prospa, I think also will be really useful, hopefully, for our listeners.
Fantastic. Well, let's cut across to the interview now and have a listen.
Hi, Beau. Welcome to the podcast. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background prior to being at Prospa.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kate. It's great to be here, and really happy to be a part of all of this. My background has been quite an interesting journey. I started my first business when I was 19 years old, and I've pretty much been running my own businesses all the way through sort of the better part of 20 years now. So I've always been an entrepreneur, always liked the idea of starting and trying to run and grow a business. My first business was, in fact, a business in the scooter industry, so I think Vespas and that sort of thing. So way back in 2002, actually opened a business in Australia in that space. I've had a technology business in telematics, and a range of different things in between. So prior to Prospa, have been doing a range of different businesses and all that sort of stuff.
I think serial entrepreneur probably sets you up really well to be running a business like Prospa as well. Tell us a little bit about the customer problem that you were looking to solve when you launched Prospa and about Prospa's journey so far.
So the customer problem for small business owners is the space around accessing capital. And having been a small business owner many times myself, and the co-founder of Prospa as well, Greg Michelle, has also had multiple small businesses in his life as well. We knew firsthand just how difficult it was to access capital if you're running and trying to grow a business. And we'd had experiences where we'd said no to opportunities, and we'd had to really struggle through growth because we couldn't get the capital we required to run those businesses. So Greg and I came together in 2012, and so going back about 9 years now, and we wanted to do something about this, to figure out, is there a way that we could put our experience in running businesses sort of together and figure out a way to create basically a product that allowed small business owners to, in a fast, simple and flexible way, access the capital they needed to run their businesses. When we started Prospa, there wasn't really anything like us in the industry, so we were really pioneering. We were sort of very lucky that the cloud as a technology was just starting to emerge, and we made a decision back in 2012 to become a 100% cloud-based business. And that's allowed us to grow and scale the business really nicely. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit more detail a little bit later. But the problem was really helping small business owners get the capital they needed as quickly as possible. When we started the business, the industry was pretty much dominated by the big banks. And when you went and you looked to try and find capital, it was really difficult. It could take you 4 to even 8 weeks to go through the application process. Sometimes it could take another 2 or 3 months to get an answer. So by the time you've applied and you've found out whether or not you could access capital, the opportunity you needed may very well have passed. So we wanted to do something about that, and hence the idea of Prospa was born.
And as you alluded to there, there's a number of other providers that are now sort of in the market and trying to solve a similar customer problem. But obviously the incumbent providers, the major banks were there beforehand. What do you think the major banks were really missing or getting wrong? Why weren't they able to solve that need? Why do you need the Prospas of the world to come in and to solve that for small businesses?
So when we look at a small business and at Prospa, we define who is a small business. We are talking about a company typically turning over less than $2 million a year in revenue. And that so happens to represent around about 97% of all businesses. And in Australia, there are about 2 million businesses. So the vast, vast majority are doing less than $2 million a year. The banks, when they look at small businesses, they're looking at companies that are usually borrowing between $1 and $5 million. And when we look at our average loan, our average customer, they're borrowing about $30,000 to $40,000. So the banking system literally defines a small business as a business looking for a facility 100 times larger than the facilities that we provide. And there's just a massive disconnect between what the end customer is really after and what the market and the incumbents were providing. You've got to remember the banks are really set up for scale, and in particular for secured lending. So products like mortgages and car loans, even large scale business lending where there are hard assets like commercial properties or plant and equipment, they're very, very good at that kind of thing. But for the average small business owner, think your local florist, your local cafe, even a small wholesaling business that might need $50,000 or $100,000, banks are just not engineered to provide fast and simple products for those types of customers. So as a result of that, companies like Prospa are required, and we've now lent out over $2 billion in the last 9 years of operation. So the size and scale of this problem is really large. And it's something that the sort of traditional system has not been able to solve, and something that companies like Prospa are solving.
I think one of the things we talk about a fair bit on the podcast is the fact that fintech is really well positioned to solve these problems for customers that traditional providers maybe don't have as much experience in, or don't have the time to really focus on solving those properly, or just, as you said, aren't set up to solve them correctly either. I do want to come back and talk a bit more about your experience building Prospa as a business. I'm sure there's a lot you can add around the success that you've had. But what I wanted to touch on first, given sort of context that we're in at the moment, the fact that Australia has weathered the pandemic and weathered 2020 pretty well, and funding obviously a really key part, I think, of the recovery that we'll see for businesses. So I wanted to get your opinions on that. What I would ask you to talk to first perhaps is the challenges that are faced by small businesses in terms of restarting the economy. I think we think we're really lucky where it's great that things are starting to reopen, but for a small business, I imagine it's just not that easy. What do you think are the key challenges that are facing small businesses in this current environment? And also, is there any advice that you would perhaps give to maybe someone who's similar to Prospa but who's from another market? What can they learn from the Australian experience?
Sure. So a couple parts of that question. I think the first part in regards to what sort of challenges small business owners are facing. I feel like a majority of small businesses have actually moved through the restarting their business phase. If you look at Australia as an example, the last kind of very heavy lockdown that we had ended in November last year, which was in Melbourne, which is the better part of 6 months ago. So the vast majority of Australia's small businesses have sort of gone through the shock of the initial kind of government restrictions, adjusted their business, and then as restrictions have been eased, been able to reboot their businesses. I think what small business owners are now facing are more challenges to do with a almost overheating economy. So things like labor shortages, are something that we're hearing a lot of from our customers. Industries like hospitality are finding it very difficult to find staff because they don't have the typical backpackers and sources of labour that come into the country. If we look at different industries, like in industries where there's a demand for technology, so things like software engineers and so forth, and data scientists and analysts, demand for those roles has gone through the roof because e-commerce has really taken off, and many small business owners didn't have an e-commerce presence before COVID, and they realized there was this whole audience now of customers shopping online, and they really need to get their businesses into the online world. So demand for those sorts of services has gone through the roof, and as have costs. It's well documented at the moment, but supply chains are under extreme pressure, and inflation is starting to creep in, so costs are going up for small businesses as well, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because if you're in a small business industry where you can pass the cost on, then you might even be able to expand your margin, but that doesn't happen to all industries. So many industries are having to wear that increase in cost while keeping their level of revenue or margin that they make at a decreasing level. So there's a range of different challenges that small business owners are facing. It's less to do with restarting their businesses, more to do with kind of these economic forces that are creating challenges for them to operate and grow. There's a great deal of confidence, I think, out there at the moment in the Australian small business community. We also run a business in New Zealand, so we're getting to see that data as well. And it follows a very similar pattern to the Australian economy. So you are quite right, Kate. We've managed the pandemic exceptionally well at a government and a health crisis level, and that's allowed the economy and particularly the small business economy to really do well during this period. I think for advice for other places where outside of Australia that are sort of rebooting or really getting started again, what we saw here, so in Australia, the key was keeping as many people employed as possible. And what we found was that most small business owners were deferring investment decisions and trying to retain their labour. Because if you have a team of 15 people, it's taking you a long time to find 15 good people to help you run your small business. And anything that a small business owner can do to retain them, they were doing. So a lot of the government support policies and so forth right around the world are oriented at trying to keep people in employment, especially in the small business part of the economy. I mean, small business owners in most countries are leading the recovery. And yes, big businesses will respond and will hire, but it's actually small businesses that have a disproportionate impact in terms of GDP and employment growth. So anything that can be put in place to help them is really good, and capital is a really important part of that. And I'll touch on this a little bit later around some of the things Prospa's doing to really try and help turbocharge the small business economy.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you made around the economic impacts. I was on holidays in Queensland recently and came face to face with that problem of there's lots of tourism there. So the tourism economy is doing well, but there's no service staff available because those people who would normally be employed haven't been able to come into the country because of international borders. So multifaceted. I'd also actually just be curious to know what your thoughts are around, as you said, the impact on different SMEs is very different depending on what industry vertical they're in. To what extent do you think that comes into, or does that play on how you respond as a provider to different businesses? Are you really conscious of the fact that these SMEs are going through quite different challenges, or is it more everyone's kind of dealing with the same problem but in a different way?
There's definitely a two-speed economy going on. So we do have to approach it differently. And fortunately, the part of the economy that is growing and the recovery is well underway is the majority of the economy. So if we look at industries sort of holistically, industries like building and trade, professional services, retail, most of hospitality, transport and logistics, these industries are going really well. Health and medical obviously is another big one that's also going really well. And those are all key industries for us as a funder. So where the two-speed is happening are in pockets of the economy. So there are definitely certain areas that are under pressure. So a good example in the hospitality industry are CBD locations. Most of the CBDs, especially Sydney and Melbourne, are still at sort of 50 to 60% of the typical staff that would come back into the CBDs. And that's causing big problems for restaurants and cafes and bars that operate in those CBD locations, because their customer base literally is at half the rate it was. People are working from home. So suburban areas are going really well. And in fact, hospitality businesses in those suburban areas are booming and are trying to grow and open up bigger sites and require capital for that. whereas the city-based areas are doing it a bit tougher. Similarly in tourism, if your tourism relied upon domestic travel, you're having a great time. So Byron Bay, as a good example in New South Wales, as busy as it's ever been. But if you're talking about Queensland, Gold Coast is doing really well. But if you go to Cairns, that area is actually under a lot of pressure because they are more of an international tourism-based destination. So there are areas that are definitely doing it more tough, but they're very localized. And fortunately, I think for the economy, these are very small parts of the economy. I think what we're seeing with the government and the way that they're responding at a federal, state and local level is now much more tailored. So we're seeing packages for aviation, which is a good example, some of the tourism sectors and some of the other areas that are under a bit of pressure. And that's what we should be doing. We should be having very tailored responses now because at a holistic level, the economy is doing very well.
I think as you said, that nuance between different businesses is very important, or different industries is very important. I think there's sometimes a tendency to lump small businesses into one big group, but there's so much variation in who those businesses are and what problems they're trying to solve as well.
There really is. And in most cases, the challenges that those businesses are facing, they're not caused by the business owner being a poor operator. Yeah, it's the circumstances of what's happened. I mean, we've got the international borders closed at the moment. It's impossible for a Cairns-based tourism business that, I don't know, does boat charters out to the Great Barrier Reef. They're just not going to find enough domestic-based customers to run their business at full scale. So it's localized. It's in many cases not their fault. I applaud these business owners though, because they're all doing whatever they have to do to get through the crisis they're still facing, and they're coming up with all sorts of innovative ways of doing it. So a number of CBD-based restaurants and cafes are now doing large-scale catering programs and delivery services out into the suburbs and a range of different things. So business owners, again, in the small business economy have proved to be very resilient over the past year and super dynamic, and they're adjusting their cost structures, their choices, and trying to grow in new and innovative ways. I think that's really testament just to how small business owners think about tough times. You know, they won't just sit there and let it happen to them. They try to do something about it.
Absolutely. You've seen some really amazing growth at Prospa recently, and I think you're sort of alluding to there. There's pent-up demand in the market. We've seen a period of SMEs being really cautious and concerned about what's happening, but we're now reopening, and SMEs are pivoting. They're thinking about dealing with those key challenges. How did Prospa prepare for that pent-up demand in the market? And again, is there any advice that you would give either to other markets or maybe not to competitors, but to sort of similar providers in different markets around how you're achieving that growth?
So the reopening, or really the rebooting, I guess, of the economy and trying to get this recovery underway, we sort of look at it as we call it the re of everything. And what we saw last year were many decisions by business owners were just effectively deferred, and they're now having to do the re of everything. So they're having to rehire. So roles that they deferred last year, or in some cases even let go of, they're now having to rehire. They're having to replace their equipment. So many business owners, February, March, April last year, if your equipment was almost at the end of its life, normally you would just upgrade and buy new equipment. Very few business owners were doing that. If you could squeeze another 12 months out of your equipment, you did that. And that's now coming to roost. They have to now replace that equipment. So they're having to replace huge volumes, and there's great tax incentives around that as well. There's also restocking. I talked about some of the supply chain challenges that businesses are facing right now. That again is driven because many businesses ran their inventory levels down as low as they could in the early stages of the crisis. And they're now seeing an economic recovery. Consumer demand and consumer confidence is at record highs. Property prices are going through the roof, so people are feeling wealthier and they're looking to buy more stuff. And businesses are trying to catch up with their inventory and actually restock their inventory. So there's all of this activity, if you like, happening. And in Australia right now, it's the end of financial year. So there's all kinds of reasons that businesses now put on all sorts of offers and commercial deals to try and establish and create more traction. So it really is a confluence of many positive forces that's creating that pent-up demand. So, at Prospa, for us, we wanted to be ready when the crisis started. And I've been fortunate in this business and in other businesses, and many of the senior people, my co-founder Greg and I, we've had experiences through many crises. And Usually the worst part of a crisis lasts 6 to 9 months. So at the beginning of this pandemic era, we were looking at it saying we've got a really tough period coming, probably for the better part of 2020, but next year should be a lot better. So what are the decisions we need to make to navigate our way through that really difficult time? And how do we ensure that we are ready for the recovery when it's well underway? And that was what the business choices we made. So we did things last year that were conserving cash activities. So for example, we brought our marketing activity down, but we knew we'd bring our marketing activity back up. So ensure that we were ready with our campaigns, with our budget allocation, with our team. We made sure we were ready to go again. And when we saw that the right economic indicators emerging, we were investing, and our marketing is now back up to kind of pre-COVID levels. So it was really about battening down the hatches for the worst of the crisis, and then being ready and being clear about what being ready meant on the other side of it. And really, since 2021 has commenced, and we're a public listed company, so a lot of this is all available data. We've just seen consistent growth month to month, and it's wonderful because small business owners really are driving the recovery. We do believe that it's an SME-led recovery, and cash is the thing that actually powers almost every investment decision. So business owners are looking at, how do I take advantage of that opportunity, and have I got a capital partner like Prospa who can fund that opportunity? And the answer to that is inevitably yes.
That's where that speed that Prospa provides becomes even more important, I imagine.
It really does, yeah. And I mean, many business owners are seeing opportunities come across their desk, and they've got days maybe to respond. A great example is in the building and trade industry, where a builder might ask 5 electricians to quote or tender on a particular job, and you get a call out of the blue from the builder saying, hey, congratulations, you've won the tender. I need to know you're accepting it in the next 48 hours. And you might have to go and buy $50,000 worth of materials in order to accept that particular tender. So do you have that $50,000? Maybe you don't. Well, it's actually a $100,000 contract, so there's a lot of margin in it for you if you can say yes. These are the business decisions that business owners are faced with, and as a capital partner, we want to be there to support these business owners so that they can say yes with confidence to those sorts of opportunities.
And that, I think, actually quite nicely leads me on to, I guess, the story behind Prospa. And you've spoken a little bit about the challenge that you were solving for customers and the value proposition that Prospa that Prospa meets. But what I'd be interested in knowing, your experience of building a really successful fintech and a successful fintech across markets as well. What are some of the key challenges that you and Greg experienced as you're going through that journey? Was there anything that you sort of faced that you weren't expecting to face in building a business?
Absolutely. Building a business of any scale, whether it's small, medium, or large, is hard. Business is just hard. You find an opportunity with a customer base, you design a product, and then effectively you try to solve a problem and get that product to market, and do that in a way that makes a little bit of profit. Like, that's a business, and it sounds easy on paper, but when you actually get into it, it's really hard to do that. And there's some unfortunate statistics. Something like 80% of new startups or businesses that start won't make it past the second year. And that's a pretty daunting statistic for anyone who's going out and starting a business. But for us, we're pretty confident of the problem space when we started. We knew that many small businesses, we'd been the customer, we knew that many of them couldn't source the right capital to run their businesses. And we thought that we could do it in a way that hadn't been done before, and that would be a unique advantage, a competitive advantage to our business, something that we could figure out how to scale quite rapidly by using technology. And then hopefully build a lasting business. I think in terms of challenges, you have different challenges at different eras within a business. I think when you're small and in those early years, really your challenge is product market fit. Can you, in a scalable way, in a profitable way, figure out how to get that product proposition into the market? And that's really hard to do. I mean, it's one thing to see a problem and to build a product. It's a totally different thing to scale that product into the market. So, we had some challenges there in the early years of doing that in a cost-effective way. In our business, our inventory is actually cash. So when we lend money to a customer, we have to source that capital ourselves. And in the very early years of our business, There was really no VC in Australia back in 2012 when we started. So we had to go offshore and find capital. And that was a really big challenge to convince somebody to bring money into Australia and to fund an asset class of small businesses that hadn't been done before. So there were some unique challenges in those early years. And anyone who's started or founded a business will probably share war stories of how hard it can be to get the first couple of employees to join you and back your crazy idea. You're wearing every hat in the business. So you're the general manager for sure, but you're also the marketing manager and the design manager. You're running marketing and all sorts of other functions as well. So it is a really tricky thing to get through those first few years. I think as you get bigger though, the challenges do change. And more recently, we moved from being a single product, single country business where we had seen and established that first very successful product into a multi-product and multi-country business. And that brings its own challenges. So, launching into a second country, launching a second product and subsequent products to that come with a range of different challenges. We had a business that could do one thing really, really well. Now we're trying to do multiple things really, really well. And that comes with the different challenges around collaboration, prioritization. As an entrepreneurial business, we're always coming up with more ideas than we have resources to do. So a lot of the challenges come from figuring out what to say no to, as much as what to say yes to. So the challenges continue to evolve. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been 9 years here at Prospa now, and we're up to about 240 people in the team, and we're now listed on the ASX as well. So it's been a wonderful journey for us, from startup with just two of us and a crazy idea right up to over $2 billion in product sales effectively, a large, much bigger listed company. So the challenges continue to evolve, but we love it. And I think you learn more about business and more about people and stakeholder management and markets every single day.
I do want to ask you about New Zealand as well, as I think I do a lot of work in both Australia and New Zealand. I think there's a tendency for both Australians and probably people outside Australia as well to see those markets as being very similar. And to sort of assume that what works in Australia will work in New Zealand. But my experience has definitely been that there's a lot of market nuance, even despite all of those similarities. I'd be curious to know if that was your experience of going into New Zealand as well, and also just how difficult it is to launch in a new market for Prospa.
So I might touch on a little bit about launching sort of the multiple product and multiple country component, because they go hand in hand effectively in business, and in most businesses that grow from a startup to a scale up. You've got a core product or a core proposition, and it sometimes isn't what you started with. You might have had to modify it a little bit in those early years to land on the right proposition. But if you want to be a scale up, you have to have landed on a product, which we sort of think of it as it's got to be your hero product. It's the product that every day you come in and there is demand for that product, and it's scaling it. You're not talking about year-on-year growth, you're talking about month-on-month growth. And that's when you know you're really onto something. So without having that kind of core product that is scaling nicely in your business, and by scaling, it's not a free product. It's got to be a revenue generating product, something a customer is prepared to pay you for. Anyone can create a free proposition and start to scale that. And there are some wonderful business models that can be built by mass customer acquisition that way, and then start to cross-sell other services. But you've got to be able to generate revenue. And however you do that, it's really important. From time to time, there are magical businesses that get built, like Facebook and others, that didn't really have to generate revenue from their direct customer. They really are the 1 in a million. And if you can build a Facebook, fantastic, well done. You've built a $500 billion company, but most startups do require a pathway to revenue. So getting that hero product right is very important. And strongest advice that I've received and that I've experienced is to not try and launch your second, your third, and your fourth product until you've got that hero product right. And as I said, you might have to pivot a few times to get it. Once you've got that hero product, it actually gives you a number of different benefits. So firstly, you've got predictable revenue. So every month you can project your revenue growth. You can use that to raise capital again. So you can go and talk to the venture capital or private equity or even the listed capital markets and demonstrate that revenue trajectory. And that allows you to make a lot of decisions around investment. because if you know what capital is coming in from a revenue perspective and you can raise capital off the back of that, then you can choose what you want to do next, whether that's launching multiple products, whether that's launching into new countries, or even acquiring businesses for different reasons. So that hero proposition, that's number one. If you've got that, that's the foundation of which you can scale from. Launching into a new country is something that can feel a little bit daunting. It can also feel very exciting, and it can feel like a way to radical scale. And one of the things that we've been very cautious about here at Prospa is ensuring that when we do launch into a new country, that we are ready to service that country by leveraging what we've already built. I think one of the mistakes that many companies make is they launch into a new country with a new product. And that can be quite a difficult and dangerous strategy, because how do you know that that market is going to be attracted to that product? How can you benchmark the success of that product against things you already do? So when you see the most successful scale-ups launching internationally, they are typically launching their core product, that hero product, into a new market. And it's a really fabulous thing if you can create that leverage and you can effectively run the operating costs out of your head office. And maybe you just need a sales or distribution arm to that country. And I think our experience in New Zealand proved that we were able to take our core proposition, all of that wonderful infrastructure we built at head office, and create a new market in New Zealand. And to this day, that's a new market that's serviced with about 5 people across the organization. So it's a wonderful example of scale. It was our existing proposition that was scaling nicely in the Australian market, taken into the New Zealand market. And the New Zealand market for us is now a bit over 10% of our total business. So from a launching into multiple countries thing, always do it with a core proposition that's working. Always expect it to take longer and cost more, a bit like acquisitions. It always is a bit harder than you think it's going to be. In business, we talk about one-way and two-way decisions. A one-way decision is an almost irreversible decision. It's really hard to pull back from. Launching into a new country is a little bit like that. You can always pull back, but it can be detrimental to your brand. It can inhibit your ability to launch in that country in the future. So you've kind of got to approach it almost more as a one-way choice, and we're going to make this work. Obviously, if it's not working after a couple of years, you can withdraw, but you've really got to go into it as this is a commitment we're making. This is going to be a material part of our business, and depending on the country you're going to, it might actually be a bigger part of your business than the country that you've started in.
Really interesting points there. Yeah, I like that idea of you get your core right and then you build and you grow. Thank you so much for your time today and all of your insights. I feel like I've learned a lot in this conversation. What I might end on is whether there's anything you can share about your goals or what you're going to be up to over the next 12 to 18 months. What can people expect from Prospa?
Yeah, I mean, talking about strengthening your core. So for us, that really is the first point, which is to really double down on what we're good at. We really do understand the Australian and New Zealand small business owner. We estimate that we have about 1% penetration of our total addressable market or our TAM. So for us, the priority is very much around continuing to build out our current propositions and make them even better, and then look for value-added services that we can bring to our customers to ensure that they stick with us in the long term. When we really think about our product strategy, when we think about where we can create value, there's 3 areas that we want to help small business owners in, and that's how they grow their business, how they run their business, and how they make payments. So for us here at Prospa, we've built wonderful products. We've got two propositions that are our kind of primary, our fixed term products and our revolving payment products. Those categories have universal appeal across almost every industry and certainly every geographical area. So for us, it really is about continuing to invest in that scale, building great propositions, enhancing our technology stack, and ultimately servicing more small businesses, or as many small businesses as we can, for the many years to come.
So watch this space.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Wonderful. It's great to be here, and thanks again.
Thanks, Beau.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Global Digital Banker podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean.